Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe DiChiara, Director of Education for K-Motion. Thank you for joining me this morning. We're going to do a webinar on posture. As mentioned on the post on the Facebook page, we're going to go through some commonalities that we see in posture. And then we're going to go through some biofeedback on how you can train your players' posture. And we'll certainly answer some questions on things you might want to know about posture with your players, some interesting things you might see on how they set up to the golf ball. But first and foremost, obviously with everything going on, I want to thank everybody for being on. Hopefully everybody is at home, safe and healthy. So we're going to do these webinars at least once a week. Again, this is our first one. Just thought we'd start very simply with posture and make this just more of a discussion on kind of what I look at in posture. I'm pretty big on it with my players. And then kind of what you all look at with your players in posture and answer any questions you might have. As we move forward in the coming weeks, we'll certainly do other topics and we'll take some recommendations on things that you all want to see. So if you do have any recommendations while you're on today, certainly type those into the chat box for future topics of webinars. And then we can start to go through those, see which ones are the most popular, and obviously address the ones that we can. And then in terms of today, if you have any questions on posture, anything you see with your players, type those questions into the question box as I'm speaking. As I mentioned on the post on Facebook page, I'm going to try and get to about 30 minutes of content for all of you, and then we'll do about 30 minutes of Q&A or thereabouts at the end of the session. So jumping into posture. This is one of the most important things that I pay attention to with my player. We know that the golf swing is very fluid, right? And there's nothing that really happens in a silo. But I can tell you with my experience that posture will affect just about anything that could possibly happen in the golf swing, for better or for worse. So I'm a big stickler on posture with my players. Both bend, right, so forward flexion in terms of how they're bending and setting up to the ball, and then also I go as far to dial in the side bend, okay, or their side tilt, and even their rotations, which we can call alignment, but that all kind of falls under the umbrella for me of posture, right? So I kind of look at all three, and I really look at all three in that order, right? I look at the bends first, because how a player is set up to the ball in terms of bending and having efficient or not will affect how much side bend they potentially can or cannot have. And then the rotations are also going to become affected by how much they're bent forward or how maybe they're not bent forward enough, okay, with their pelvis or their upper body. So let's start just with a conversation about ideals, right? We know everybody is built differently, so there really is no magic number, in my opinion, for posture where you have to get everybody into a certain number of pelvis bend and upper body bend if we start talking about bends first. But I will tell you that there is a corridor that we really want to see our players stay in. Once you start to get outside of that corridor or whatever those tolerances are that we see the norms, then we start to see some things happen when the motion starts in terms of inefficiencies further on down the line. And you can just about always draw that back to how they're setting up to the golf ball. So I'll discuss what those commonalities are that I see. But let's get started with some ideals of forward bend of the upper body and the pelvis. And then I'll go ahead and throw my system on in a bit here, and we'll go through some biofeedback on really what we want to see. So when we have a player setting up to the golf ball, okay, ideally, what I look for within reason is a pelvis that is half as bent forward as my upper body. So we hear the term 20 degrees of pelvis bend and 40 degrees of upper body bend pretty often. Now, that's a great benchmark to try and get your players to in terms of bend with the pelvis at address and bend with the upper body at address. But I'll tell you, you can keep that within reason of plus or minus, let's say, 5. right? So you're going to have players and certain things that are going to affect their bend, both with their physicality as well as with external factors like equipment, right? If they have improperly fit golf clubs, that's certainly going to affect the bend. So again, if we look at that 20 degrees of pelvis bend and 40 degrees of upper body bend as a benchmark, from there, we can kind of play with it plus or minus 5 degrees. So let's, take the pelvis, we can go, 15 to 25, upper body 35 to 45, depending on, what club we have in the player's hand, if the clubs are a little longer or a little shorter. And then again, if they have any physicality issues, C posture, S posture, imbalances, things like that, you're going to start to see those numbers go to the extremes on the positive side or the negative side. Now, I'll tell you, you don't always have to just get them to 20-40. I had players of all levels, from beginner to tour player, that, just perform better at 25 and 45, okay? But try and get them to where it's about double, right? So 20-40 is actually, obviously double. And if you're going to go up a couple degrees, you can kind of scale that accordingly just to keep the balance between the pelvis and the upper body bend, okay? So I always look to see that amount of bend when I'm in a balanced posture. Now, I'll talk to you what a balanced posture means to me. So if we're looking at 2D video, okay, and we'll get to the 3D here in a second, but again, a lot of you and a lot of players are very familiar with 2D and kind of what their swing looks like on video. So what I pay attention to on 2D is very simple for an efficient posture. When I have my players set up to the golf ball and they're in a balanced setup, meaning I've got their pressure correct in their feet and I've got their bends where I want them, I look to draw a line from about the middle of the foot or just forward of the middle of the foot. Let's call it the last shoelace, okay? And if I draw a straight line up from that position of the foot, it should hit the tip of my knee, the tip of the club, and my armpit, okay? If I go through my armpit, it actually should just about hit where the sensor is, if we have the upper body sensor placed correctly, right at the base of the cervical spine there, or at the top of our T-spine, that line should hit that sensor as well. So I call this a center balanced line. Now, what happens when we start to get to the extremes of bends in our posture, and what's that going to look like relative to that center balance line? So if I get into my good posture again, okay, if I start to get myself into more of an S posture, okay, so S posture is when we see some excessive curvature to the spine, meaning we have our pelvis and our lumbar spine more arched down here, and our upper body will usually stand up a little bit more and be more upright, okay? So we're going to have an upper body bend that is low, on the low side, and we're going to have a pelvis bend that's on the high side, or excessive amount of bend to the pelvis. So what will end up happening when we see more of an S posture, okay, relative to that center balance line, is because my upper body is standing up, my hands are usually going to raise, and that shaft will become more in line with my forearms instead of having more of an angle to them, and the butt end of the club is going to move outside of that center balance line, okay? So inversely, also I would stand up, and that sensor on my torso would definitely not hit the line as it's extending up from the balls of my feet. On the other side, if I was getting more into a C posture, if we have a player that's in a C posture, which is not enough pelvis bend, or too low pelvis bend and too high upper body bend, we see more of a rounding to the spine, okay? We get this a lot with our clients that are a bit older. Maybe they spend a lot of time at a desk, right? So they're a little more kyphotic. and they're going to be more in this type of a position. What you'll tend to see from that center balance line perspective is the butt end of the club is going to work its way too far inside that line, because my hands are going to be lower because my upper body bend went a bit too excessive, okay? So those are two of the common faults that we see when we're talking about bend and address. You've got the S posture again, too much arch to the lower back, upper body stands up. And then we have that C posture, which is more of a rounding to the upper back or a tucking too much of the pelvis. And I think that's important to note because, again, we know players do just about everything under the sun, right? So there's really no box that we can fit all players into. So get very detailed. I get real nitpicky about my players' posture, right, down to a couple degrees, because it really does make a difference when we're talking about starting a motion. If you're not in an athletic posture, really difficult to get a motion started properly, and then it's just a domino effect down the line where we run into anything under the sun could happen, right? You know, it's just any swing fault that we can see can happen from a poor posture. And we're going to talk about what we see in terms of commonalities next. But just, again, get detailed with that. And what I mean by that is you might have a player that has a pretty good-looking torso, but their pelvis is just really tucked underneath, right? So what does that mean in terms of balance and getting the golf swing to be athletic? Well, the more I tuck my pelvis underneath, okay, the more my pressure is going to want to go back to my heels, or vice versa, right? It's like chicken or the egg. If a player sets up really in their heels, well, they're going to tuck their pelvis underneath to try and center themselves again so that they don't fall over and that they feel somewhat balanced. Also, if a player's got their pressure way out on their toes, generally speaking, they're going to stick their butts out and they're going to arch that lower back to try and center themselves again somewhere in the middle of their foot. So pay close attention to where the pressure is in the feet, right? I like to see it just behind the balls of the feet so that we have a good chance, right? If I put my club here, right where I like to see the posture, the pressure, now I have a good chance at starting to work on the bend of the pelvis, which is going to be the most affected first by the pressure in the feet. Obviously, it's one of the next things in the chain, so we'll see that affected first. Then obviously the upper body is going to organize itself to stay balanced. So again, get detailed when we're talking about bends, all right? Not to say that 25 and 35 or 25 and 45 might be better for your player, but you can kind of play around with that, experiment, and see what produces the best outcomes, okay? So let's now move on to the next step in posture, and we're going to talk about side bend, okay? So if I'm face on to all of you, when we look at the side bend of a player at posture, okay, again, very much club dependent, right? As clubs get longer, as we get to a driver, we might see a little bit more side bend because we're trying to launch it a little bit higher. Wedges, we might see a little bit less side bend. I'll tell you, I dial side bend into the upper body down to the degree, all right? I really want to see something specific here because side bend is really going to affect the delivery of the club in terms of attack angle and dynamic loft, right? So where we're setting up isn't always where we end up, but it has a pretty big influence on it throughout the motion. So if I'm going to take my setup, I want to see, I particularly like a zero side bend of the pelvis. I want to see the pelvis at zero, very level and very balanced. As we start to work lead hip higher, okay, my pressure is going to want to go more to the lead foot. And if we have players where the trail hip gets higher, again, the pressure is going to want to go to my trail foot. Now, if you have a player that errs on the side of one hip higher than the other, if you're going to allow anything, I would tell you, err on the side of the lead hip higher but by no more than 2 or 3 degrees, okay? Again, I'm just speaking from my personal preference here. I really like to see a level pelvis at address, okay? I just think it's going to allow my players to start the motion off as efficiently as possible. And then moving up to the upper body, we know because the trail hand's lower on the golf club than the lead hand, we're going to have some sort of tilt with the trail side lower, okay? But again, too excessive, we're going to have a lot of issues with contact and with dynamic loft coming off after impact, all right? So I look to see about 8 to 10, all right? Let's take 10 as the target, and we'll make 8 to 12 degrees our corridor, all right? So once you start getting less than 8, okay, obviously I'm exaggerating right here. This would be more of a, a trail side higher. Once you start getting less than 8, you're going to start to see a steepening effect to the shot, all right? So side bend this way is more of a steepener. Side bend this way is more of a shallower, right? So if we're here, you can tend to see some attack angles that are a little bit more on the excessive side down, all right? And also dynamic loft is going to be really low, right, comparatively. If we start to go above 12, okay, right out here probably more in the 20 range. If we start going this way, okay, we start to see a very shallow angle of attack where the club's going to want to bottom out behind the golf ball, and we're going to start to see more of a higher dynamic loft. Again, could potentially cause a real spinny shot, bad contact. Just about all of that can happen from a side bend that is going to be too excessive this way. All right? So let's tie this back to 2D again, or video. Just like I draw that center balance line for my posture or bend, I look at lines that go straight up from the ankle, okay? And again, I want to see that line, if it's straight from my ankle, I want to see it hit just the outside of my hip, and then right underneath my armpit, okay? Or right in the center of my shoulder joint on both sides, okay? I like this because it allows me to help my player to control a pressure shift. Once we start getting our base of support outside of those lines, well, then we start to see some issues in excessive side bend, okay? Or again, as we start our motion, it's very easy to start getting a lot of excessive tilt that we really don't want, okay? So that's what I look for in terms of side bend in posture. So finally, let's look at rotations, right? If I go back to this direction for you, rotations are fairly easy. I just like to see upper body and lower body matching, all right? So if we have our calibrated target line, okay, that line in space that has been calibrated globally, I look to see my torso sensor and my pelvis sensor, all right, for those angles in terms of rotation, just match that calibrated line, okay? Now, just to point something out, because a lot of you that use the system know that when you look at rotation in any report or any graph in our software, usually you see the rotation starting out slightly positive, right? So the reason for that does not mean that your player's alignment or the alignment portion of their posture is open to that target line. All it means is because a player has bend and then we add side bend, when we do that, it opens up the rib cage locally or internally, let's call it. So if I have an arrow pointing out of my chest, right? I'll go this way so you all can see. If I flex forward, okay, that arrow or my club just pointed straight at the ground. If I add a little bit of side bend, that butt of the club now no longer points as much to the ground. It's starting to raise up. So the more side bend I create, the more that's going to raise up to the horizon, right? So When you have bend and you add side bend, it sets the rib cage slightly open. That, again, does not mean that your player is aligned to the left of the target. So when you're in live mode or training mode, biofeedback, right? That's where I look to see the torso sensor and the pelvis sensor right around 0, okay? Square that calibrated target line. Now, what happens when this isn't the case, right? A lot of times players get crossed up, right? That's going to affect how they're going to take the club away more than anything else, okay? So when we see players, let's say, align their feet to the right, okay, and they align their body, or they're trying to get their upper body more to the left or more square, all right? A lot of the times, this is caused by a grip that could be too weak, or the right hand or the trail hand being too far on top, right? So that's going to cross them up. When this happens, because the club starts away usually first, and the torso is too open relative to the pelvis, so the pelvis that way, torso that way, we're going to see the club suck to the inside a lot, all right? So just take that as a commonality. And inversely, if the feet are more pointed to the left and the shoulders are trying to get square, right, or more to the right, then usually we'll see a player with more of a stronger grip that could be the cause of that. And then from there, usually the flow of how the club works away is that it doesn't get on plane and it actually works steep or above the plane, right? So when we're feet closed, torso open, usually the club's going to work under plane, all right? The other way, feet open or left of the target and torso closed with a stronger grip, usually the club is going to work more vertical as a fault. Okay, so now that we're starting to get into faults that occur from our posture, let's talk about some common things that can happen based on a posture that might not be as efficient as we want it. So if I start off and we talk about posture in terms of bend, all right? So let's start with S posture, all right? So we've got a lot of arch to the lower back, torso standing up. How is that going to affect other parts of my body? Usually because my chest or my sternum is farther away from the ground, my wrists are going to lock and I'm going to have excessive, what we call ulnar deviation, okay, or unhinging of the wrists. So when this happens, just as a result, very difficult to set the wrist properly on plane, okay? So generally speaking, we get into a very lifty type of a takeaway. Players not using their wrist properly as an effect. The other effects that we see, so again, if I'm in my S posture, because of S posture, we cannot rotate very well. As a matter of fact, both S and C posture really prohibit the efficiency of rotation, just in different ways. So when I have too much arch to the lower back, okay, and my torso is standing up, all right, what will end up happening is I'll start my swing, and because I have some excessive tilt here, usually it's going to cause an excessive amount of side bend, all right? So when my right hip starts to go too high, let's go this way. So I got my arch, and I start to take the club away. Because I can't rotate, I'm going to probably move more laterally than I want my player to move. So we can call this sway, right? So we can't rotate, we can't load into this hip. So we're really going to start to get the right hip too high. I'm swayed, and then that will commonly cause the upper body to start to tilt the other direction as I get up to the top of my motion. So two of the common things you're going to see when a player has S posture is a sway, okay, trail hip getting too high, and then once they add rotation to the upper body, because this is starting to push the upper body towards the target, I usually will get into more of a reverse spine angle position as a fault. Okay, so let me just show you here with a piece of paper. So I like a piece of paper to really explain how the pelvis moves, right? Because the pelvis is not a circle, it's an oval, right? So we've got an elongated, obviously a rectangle piece of paper here. If I hold this perfectly level to the ground, right? So here's my pelvis, piece of paper is level to the ground. As I tilt forward, okay, as I tilt forward, that piece of paper will tilt forward. That's my pelvis. So as I'm tilted, if I have too much tilt or F posture, okay, more tilt, as I add rotation to that tilt, the right side of my pelvis or my right hip is going to want to go higher, right? So if I had no bend, just standing here, and I added rotation in plane, I don't have inside bend. As I add a little bit of bend, add rotation, and stay stable in plane, the right side went a little higher. If I get really excessive, that right side, that top corner, went much higher. That's why we can connect S posture with a lot of sway, and then again, as that affects the upper body motion, it sends it tilting towards the target, right? And that's where our reverse spine angle comes from. All of those could be brought right back to fixing a player's posture first. So, and firstly, as I mentioned, right, if I don't have any bend and I rotate in plane, I don't have any side bend. So let's talk now about players that have C posture, right? Here I am, excessive C posture. I've got no bend, and I rotate in plane. My hips didn't create any side bend, and therefore, my shoulders are probably not going to create much side bend either. We call this flat shoulder plane, right? We don't have as much angle to the shoulders as we like to have when we get at the top of our swing. So C posture can be connected, for those of you that use the evaluation report, excessive spin, too high rotation, too low side bend, which is going to influence our shoulder plane in the flat portion of it, right? So flat shoulders. And then what ends up happening, obviously our players are trying to make good contact with it. So we have flat shoulders, club works under plane, and then they lift, right? And then we get that across the line look, and then inevitably players are going to want to throw their hands at the ball at that point. We start to see over the top. So C posture, if we link it down the line, really influences spin, okay, or poor loading into the trail hip, right? Too much rotation. Flat shoulders, right, as a result. Usually then, as the player from the flat shoulders and they get the club too vertical and maybe even across the line, they start to work the club over the top, right? So there's another fault that could be linked right to C posture in the downswing. And then when the player's here, guess what they're not going to do? They're not going to rotate very well. They're going to stand up. And then there is your loss of posture, your early extension, right? Players trying to shallow the club out at the last minute to make somewhat of good contact with the ball, right? So again, everything is linked down the line, and you'd be shocked that if you look at posture first and get more detailed with posture, how many of these things can start to clean up, okay? So hopefully that all makes sense. Let me take you all through kind of what I do with posture and biofeedback. So let me just show you where I would go in your biofeedback manager here. I'll shut my camera off for a second. Okay, so you all should be able to see my screen right now. So very simple posture program. Bend and address. I mentioned I look at bend first. All right. Then I go to advanced posture. Okay, that's bend and side bend. And then I'll even go to expert posture, right? So again, you don't have to go all the way through all three of these with a player right away, right? I mean, expert posture is all three metrics with both segments. Maybe you take one segment off, or you just stick in advanced posture until your player is comfortable. But I can tell you, if you can really use this program to dial in your player's posture, you will start to see the motion really change. All right, so let me throw my sensors on quickly here, and I'll show you how I walk through this program with a player and how I would apply this to a real-world scenario with a player with, you know, on the range or in your studio, whatever your situation might be. And this is something where if your players, again, in the situation we're in, we all know that a lot of people are at home right now. Posture is something that you can work on in your living room, right? So if you've got players that are open to having a K player, right, they could be working on this nonstop while they're at home. And many of my players do, especially during this time. So I'm going to launch this program, and I'll go ahead and train all activities. Okay, I'm going to set my timers. I'll set them to 3 seconds, and I'm going to calibrate.
Calibration in 3, 2, 1. Calibration complete.
All right, let me turn my camera back on. So this is a good time quickly to talk about sensor placement, right? Sensor placement is critical when it comes to bends, especially. My torso sensor, okay, I would like the garment to be right at the base of my collar, right? So if you all stand up and you just flex your neck forward, let your chin come down, you'll see a protrusion at the base of the neck, okay? That's essentially where you want the torso sensor to be, or just below that point. Then my pelvis sensor, if you notice, is just below my belt, okay, and it's right over my tailbone, all right? If this sensor rides too high, all right, upper body or pelvis, my bends are going to go too much. I'm going to get excessive amount of bending, all right? If they're too low, a lot of the times it'll show bends that are not high enough. So just when you're working with players' posture, double check those sensors as much as you can, because it's going to mean the difference between a couple degrees, and a couple degrees can mean the difference between a good shot and a bad shot, right? So just get really detailed with that when you're doing it, okay? Now, progressions, those of you who have heard me speak before, I'm big on progressions. Progressions are key for motor learning. When we go too much too soon, the player can't retain what we're trying to do, and therefore they're not able to retain that motion or that pattern, and they end up losing it, okay? So in terms of progressions, I like to start with no club, all right? So if I'm coming back to all of you, if this is my studio here, and I'm going to hit some shots, I'll start right back here. I'll come in, I'll walk in, and I'll just get my bends, okay? Right? I'll just kind of find where I want to be, all right? So you can see I'm right in the middle of those ranges there, okay? A drill that I like for bend with a club is something I call posture spin. So we go ahead and put the club right on the chin and on the belly button, okay? Hold it there with I like your left hand, right hand on your thigh, okay? Start to soften the knees just a little bit. You can rock back and forth to get your pressure good. Find the middle or just behind the ball of the foot. Soften the knees a little bit. Start to bend forward until you get just above the patella or the kneecap. And then from there, usually you're going to be in a pretty good bend at that point, okay? That's a nice way to get the player to stay engaged okay, and get into good posture. I just use the word engage because core engagement is going to help the posture or the pelvis stay very stable. If we lose core engagement, a lot of the times we see players go into S posture, okay? This here shuts off, these muscles turn on, and it's going to get that pelvis to get too much anterior tilt, all right? So again, I'll do walk-ins, right? No club first. Then I'll put a club in my player's hands. Okay? Walk in. Get the same bend, right? Right now I'm just working on my bend, right? So as I get more comfortable with this and I'm able to do it, maybe I'll add the aspect of making a swing, right? As soon as I have the tone, I get comfortable, right? I make a swing. No golf ball yet. I add the golf ball after that, all right? If they get the tone, then I can go ahead and let them hit a golf ball. So then we start to layer on side bend. Makes it more difficult, right? So right now, if I get into my bends and my side bends are good, as you just saw, the reps went down, right? So again, start that process over again. This is a whole nother layer of complexity. Take the club away, all right? You can even add unstable surfaces. For those of you that like half foam rollers, right? Half foam rollers are going to make me unstable this way, all right? So you can use unstable surfaces. You know, even an alignment stick underneath the feet, right? Underneath the balls of your feet so that they can feel where the pressure is. That's a version of an unstable surface, right? I even have my players take their shoes off so that they can really feel the ground when they're doing this. So again, we walk in and then we get the tone, okay? There's another rep, right? So now that I have that, I step away. Just go through those reps and you'll be able to start to retrain that posture and where they are. And then finally, the third one with expert posture would be all three, all right? Now, if that's too much for your player, let's say they can do this well, but you get to expert posture and you're really struggling. Well, take one of the segments off. That's another way to progress them to make it a little bit easier, and then you can layer on that other segment after. Once they can do both segments with all three metrics, now you're really starting to dial in your player's posture, and you should start to see their motion change. So that's kind of where I'm going to stop the content for today on posture. We're going to take some questions now, and hopefully we can get through as many as possible. I don't know how many are in the chat box, but we'll get through as many as possible, and then the ones that we're unable to get to in the amount of time we have left, we'll certainly follow up with you and get those answered. Okay. Mason, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Joe?
I can.
All right. We have quite a few questions, so I'll dive right in for you.
Go for it.
All right. Your first question is from Kieran. Who has the best posture, ladies or men?
Who has the best posture, ladies or men? Okay, let me turn on the camera again. I don't know if either have the best posture, but I'll tell you that the commonalities that we see, women are usually going to be a little bit more anterior, okay, or a little bit more likely to be in S posture, and men actually are more likely to be C posture for whatever reason, but especially women and juniors for that matter, be very careful of that pelvis position. A lot of the time you're going to see a lot of anterior tilt, right? So just the other day there was a student that I had matching pelvis and upper bodies. A woman had 40 degrees, right? So, you know, she was okay here, but this was just very much too much anterior tilt. And it was kind of an odd one because usually when this has that much tilt to it, this starts to stand up, okay? But it didn't with her. So just be aware of that. Again, I don't think there's any one male or female that has better posture, but there are tendencies for each group.
All right. This next question is from John. What part of the armpit, back, mid, or front in terms of the centered posture alignment from down the line?
Yep, great question. So when we're looking from this angle, okay, I look to see it go to the center of the shoulder or the center of the armpit, maybe just behind or on the back side of my bicep. Okay, so I don't want it out here. I would like to see it more in this range, right? And if you extend that line up where this torso sensor, I apologize, they wore a black shirt, not the smartest thing, but wherever this sensor is, okay, if you extend that line up further, it should hit that sensor. Okay?
Okay. Our next question is from Ben. At address, where do you like to see the weight in the feet from heel to toe? So at address, where do you like to see the weight in the feet from heel to toe?
Yep, great question. I like to see it in the midfoot, okay, or just behind the balls of the feet. If it gets to the balls of the feet, actually, again, this is my preference, my philosophy, I think that's a little bit too far forward. So just behind the balls of the feet, midfoot, let's call it, okay, behind the bottom shoelace, that's really a good spot to get the pressure in the feet.
Okay, this one is from Craig. So no matter what the shot, you want level pelvis.
In terms of side bend, I believe he's talking about. So I'm speaking in terms of a standard setup position. Once we add external factors, and external factors could mean different types of shots, then you might see, some differences there by a couple degrees. But remember, we're not talking in extremes, okay? So again, if I'm trying to launch one a little bit higher, maybe I do get a little bit more this way. If I'm trying to hit a knockdown shot, yeah, maybe I am a little bit more on this side. But really, if we're talking more than 5 degrees either way, especially with the pelvis, that's really what I'm speaking about there, we're really going to start to see some issues with our contact as a result. So clubs, shot type, trajectory, curvature, they're going to play a part in some adjustments. But again, if we get to the extremes or the outer edges of the corridors, we're going to start to see a decline in our contact and our consistency.
Okay, this question is from Sean. Without a pressure mat, do you have any ways to determine where the pressure in the feet?
Yeah, so that's where I'll use an alignment stick. Put an alignment stick right down that's at an angle that you can call it, let's square to our calibrated target line, and then just put the player's feet where you want the center of pressure in each foot to be, and give them the cue to push the alignment rod down into the ground. And they'll be able to feel very quickly whether their pressure is to the toes or to the heels of where the alignment stick is.
Okay, good. This question is from Ben. With the pointer club coming out of the chest and it points to the target line, would that be a good indicator that the player has enough forward tilt?
So let me just repeat that back. So with the club pointer line coming out of my chest, let me go back to bend here. You could watch my screen. I just hit the M key for metrics on my keyboard. So again, this is going to be pretty dependent because obviously the spine is not a rigid body. So if I'm straight here, right, there's 0 degrees of bend. That's pretty much horizontal. As I flex forward to 40, for me, it's going to point a little bit outside the target line. Okay? If I was going to point at the ball, I would be more high 50s. So not always going to point at the target line, a little bit outside of it. But again, the spine flexes and extends, and your height is really going to play a part in where that hits the ground.
Okay, good. This next one is from John. What's your thought of flat pelvis at setup, yet gets good tilts at the top? I see a lot of GG students that start flat and get steep with their tilts.
So if the pelvis starts flat, I might need a little clarification on this one from John. Flat meaning side bend, and then the tilts are better at the top, is what I think I'm hearing. He said that he sees a lot of George Gangis's students go flat or go too much tilt to flat. Can you repeat that one more time just so I know I can answer it correctly?
Yes, I see a lot of GG students that start flat and get steep with their tilts.
Yeah. So again, if you start level, right, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get good tilts at the top. You can still get a lot of side bend, okay? Right? If I rotate more and I really work my trail leg back, I started level, but I've got a lot of side bend here, all right? So my personal opinion on this position is that I haven't loaded into my trail side very well, and if I did, my side bend wouldn't be quite as much. I'll tell you, and again, next week, we're going to definitely go into backswing, what I look for in pelvis motion, so I hope you all can join on that one as well. But I like to see flat to start, level. Once we get up to the top, I'm looking for about 10 degrees. Let's call it 8 to 12, right? Use that corridor. And then I am really, really big on getting my players' pressure forward and getting the pelvis back to level and square by the time my lead arm gets to parallel in the downswing. Okay? So flat to start, 8 to 12, right? Assuming a stock shot, right? This is more of a stock swing. And then level and square, pressure has gotten the majority of the way to the lead side. By the time I get my lead arm parallel to the ground, that will allow me to start to use the ground on my lead side to start to get my body open and create good tilts on the lead side. Again, that's just my coaching style, my preference.
Okay, good. The next question is from Marco. How much do you take individual height and wingspan into account talking about the average bending at address?
Yeah, again, good question. That is definitely going to affect how much a player bends forward. In addition to that, club length, right? If they're not fit properly, that's also going to play a part in that. I personally don't measure wingspan with my players. That's not one of the data points that I capture in the beginning, but I am aware of it, right? So again, if players got longer arms, shorter clubs, typically we'll start to see a little bit more bend rather than a player that's got maybe some shorter arms, and that's going to cause them to stand up a little bit taller. So just I'm aware of it, but again, I don't detail that down to measuring their wingspan.
Okay, this next question is from Matt. Is there a way to make the time longer than 0.05 seconds during biofeedback?
Absolutely. So if we go into show guide info, right down here at the bottom, seconds per rep, you can type in whatever you want there. Okay, and as a matter of fact, you can go down to 0.0, and if you have the program linked to another point in the swing, as soon as I get into that position, it'll go to the next activity. So you can go from no seconds all the way up to whatever you want to go to. Okay.
Okay, this next question is from Rich. You can add rotation and side bend to the training as well?
Yes. So by going into expert posture, which would be another activity, that would be all three, right? So if I take the shoulders off, just doing pelvis, that's all three motions right now. But if I was here, let's say I didn't have the other activity up and I wanted to add the other two, I can go to show guide info and select the ones that I want. These are side bend on the right, bend in the middle, and rotation on the left. And now I have edited or adjusted that activity, and now I've got more metrics that I'm training. I just wouldn't recommend that because it still only says bend and address, and now they're training other things, so it could get confusing. I like to keep things pretty uniformed when I'm doing training, especially if I'm training players remotely, which I do pretty often. You know, keeping things really uniformed and organized is going to be an easy way to eliminate confusion with your players when you're training them from afar.
Sure, simple is good. All right, the next question is from Ben. How many degrees of forward tilt and side bend are you looking for in the player?
So forward tilt, okay, for me, I'm looking for about around 20, around 40, let's call it, okay? Again, there's corridors. I call them corridors, tolerances, plus or minus, right? Plus or minus 5 off of 2040, you're really not going to go too far off, right? The players might play better from, 5 degrees more, 5 degrees less. Side tilt, I like to see 0 side bend in the pelvis. Let's call it plus no more than 3. I don't like minus. I don't want the trail hip ever higher than the lead hip. So 0 to positive 3. And then upper body side bend at address, let's call it around 10 plus or minus 2 or 3 is what I look for, depending upon the club. And again, to Craig's point, the type of shot you're trying to hit.
Okay, your next question is from Andy. How much does footwear affect posture, particularly bend?
Yeah, a huge amount. So again, footwear, if we start talking about golf shoes and shoes in general, usually shoes have something what we call a heel lift, or the heel is a little bit higher, right? Unless you have one of those minimalist shoes that are completely flat. So again, I'm pretty big on, there's different schools of thought, right? So I'm not big on my players having a lot of stability in the shoe, right? I feel that's more of like a cast, right? It doesn't allow them to move, and it eliminates or limits foot function. So I like more of a pliable shoe with a minimal amount of heel lift. When you have heel lift that's too much, then really what starts to happen is it's going to throw off the tilts of the pelvis a little bit more easily.
Very good. The next question is from Jackie. How do you handle someone that can't get into the posture? They are C-shaped. Physically, they can't make the change.
Yep. So again, we all see players that have physical inabilities. So if a player's got excessive C posture, okay, you're going to try and do the best you can to get them into a little bit more of a neutral posture, knowing you're probably not going to get them all the way there. Then you can set guide live. Okay, so on my screen there at the top left, you've got that set guide live button. You set guide live to the best possible position you can get them in, save it, and then that becomes their posture. So again, you're not getting them maybe all the way there, but you're doing the best you can to get that player a little bit more neutral, and then taking the activity and making it their own, really, by setting guide live.
Thanks, Joe. Your next question is from John. Do you like to see the hands farther out from your center line at address with longer clubs such as driver?
Yes, good question. Again, maybe a little bit, right? So with a driver is essentially going to be really on the flattest plane of any club that we've got in our bag. So again, if the hands get a little bit further away, a little bit, maybe I'll allow that if the player hits it better from that position. But honestly, I don't want to see it too far out, because what ends up happening if the hands get too far away from the center balance line, generally speaking, it's going to promote a lot of additional roll to the forearms too early. And then you're going to see the club and the driver suck to the inside. And then we start to see that over the top move as a result. So really, not very much, to be honest with you, maybe a little bit. I still want to see, if I got the driver here, I still would like to see the relationship of the butt end of the club to the center balance line somewhere the same. Again, maybe a little bit further out, but not much, because I still want to be able to work the club on the plane that I want as I take the club away. If we get too far, right, then I don't have, then if I get too far, my ulnar deviation goes higher, which really will start to limit what I can do as I take the club away. A lot of the times I don't hinge soon enough, and then we start to see that occur. As a result, club sucks to the inside or under plane. Okay?
Okay, your next question is from Ashley. I think a lot of coaches can relate to this one. What do you do with a student who has limitations but is not willing to do the work to change their limitations?
Player that has limitations and not willing to do the work. Well, I am of the belief, and I practice this with all my players, I put accountability on them and set realistic goals, right? So you can sit down with that player. Again, I know I'm speaking in an ideal world right now, and players are going to push back. I understand that. But if you can put certain time constraints or what you're expecting from them in terms of time and work put in, and then what the outcome will be, and then let them know that that outcome is not going to be here, it's going to be here based on what you're currently doing, that's really the best thing that you can do, because then you're setting realistic goals for the player. And essentially, you know, we're going to have players that don't want to commit as much time. They either don't have the time or they don't want to practice, but they're going to have to expect less than, and as long as they do, then I think that protects you as the coach. When that, I call it an upfront agreement. When that upfront agreement isn't established, then you tend to lose players over time because their goals are not being met because there's a mismatch in what you're expecting and what the player's expecting.
All right, and Joe, we are almost to the top of the hour, so we could probably make this your last question. There's quite a few we didn't get to, but just let everyone know we'll answer them and get you back with an email. So this question is from Mark. A lot of students are too much open for upper body rotation at address. I notice that it's more about the rib cage than the shoulders. What are your best drills to correct that mistake?
Great question from Mark. Really happy to see Mark on. I know we were exchanging some emails. So I'm glad that he was able to sign on. So yes, as I mentioned, rib cage, okay, players too open with their rib cage, what will end up happening is, so if I take my arms away and my rib cage is too open, okay, then what will end up happening as a result, because my shoulders work independently of my rib cage, obviously, is then I will start to manufacture my shoulders and my grip to work back to square. Usually it gets closed at that point. So the ribs are open and the shoulders are closed as a result. So what I like to do is I'll start players straight up, standing tall. I'll actually have them feel like they're retracting their shoulder blades a little bit, okay, right back here. So they'll retract their shoulder blades a little bit, engage their core, soft arms, and then let the club fall, okay, as a result. So it's okay if the shoulders protract as you start to work your way down, but a lot of the time if they start here and then they get open, and then the shoulders get closed because they keep strengthening their grip because they're tired of slicing it. So they keep strengthening their grip, which exacerbates the shoulders or exaggerates the shoulders getting closed. And now they're just crisscross. Their shoulders are going this way, rib cage is going this way, and then the pelvis and the feet could do either. So start a player tall, okay, club out in front of them, retract the shoulders, engage the core, flex forward, let the club fall. Okay, that would be a drill that I would take that player through. So I know that we're at the top of the hour. We will get to the other questions via email. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Really happy to see we had a great turnout. I'm really happy to see this. Again, we'll announce next week's webinar here shortly. You'll be able to sign up for it the exact same way. I hope everybody is safe and healthy, gets through this okay. And again, any questions you might have, remain active on our Facebook certified page. We're happy to answer everybody's questions to make this time as productive as possible, and hope to see everybody next week. Thanks, everyone.